Hello and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy Podcast. We are in the Meno today. So, welcome back. I hope you're enjoying the series. We are exploring how to use the dialectic with another person. Now, the first couple of dialectics we've seen in the Meno have been Socrates being guided by the truth, being guided by his understanding and vision of reality. Okay, unfolded through a structure we call the dialectic with another person in a kind of manner, a friendly, gentle way. But, as we saw, didn't really change Meno's mind. He was still stuck. So now we have a different kind of dialectic where we are not addressing the truth. We are starting from Meno's ignorance, starting from his, and by ignorance I mean something that isn't true, that someone believes is true. So, the idea of ignorance in philosophy means to believe something to be true that isn't. Now, Meno believes his idea of virtue to be true, and of course, don't we all? Meno is a surrogate for us, and the sorts of people we find around us. So Socrates is teaching us, how do we relate to ourselves? How do we relate to our own ignorance? How do we relate to things that we are convinced about, specifically about how to live? What it means to be a good person, what it means to live a good life, what's the ideal that we can be? All of these things are tied to virtue, the excellence of the soul. What are we seeking? How can we be the best we can be? Now, Socrates has already identified that usually it's to do with your family and your city, the culture you're in. And then that dictates the teacher that you're gravitated towards, like Gorgias for Meno. And it also affects the sort of person you end up dating. All of these things Socrates has identified in Meno simply by his manner. And it only took him one sentence. It only took one sentence for Socrates to realize, oh, this is your idea of wisdom. This is what you think it means to be just, to be virtuous. Okay, so what do we do about that when it's wrong? Hopefully this is not too much of a surprise to people, but usually people's idea of what's real and what's just and what's virtue is wrong. Now, rational people would say, well, of course, everyone has different ideas of those things, so at least 99.9% of people are wrong. Usually people then say, but not me. But that's the nature of a belief. That's the nature of ignorance. You think it's real. So what effect does this have on us, on our souls? Well, if you run into someone like Socrates, who runs through the best kind of conversation someone can have with you, rationally, based on truth, directing you to being, taking the many into a one, allowing you to have a single definition, not just point to physical examples, even then, you might not be convinced, as Meno wasn't. So now in the text, we are starting from, well, okay, what's your position, Meno? Let's start from there. Let's see if we can work from where you are at. And Meno, of course, wasn't able to use the paradigm that we are learning. He just quoted a poet that happened to agree with what he likes, which is how most people are in the world. If you have any experience with human beings, that's usually how people think. They already have their mind made up because of the way humans are raised, because of the nature of what's called the pathologos that we're learning in our other series, and as an unsuspected false belief about what's true, what's good, what's real, and what's the self, that our whole life becomes an expression of. So we're gravitated towards people who reflect back our own opinions. Sometimes that's called echo chambers, or in-group, out-group mentality, or us versus them, or prejudice. But really, it's an expression of a false, unsuspected false belief about what's true, good, real, and self. That's called the pathologos. So what? Well, so that's what we're doing. We are Menos. We are mini Menos ourselves. And we want to know how do we relate to ourselves in the best way, given, unless you are completely blind and stuck and stupid, that you think, well, surely I am the one person who knows everything. If you are that stupid and arrogant, you're probably not watching this. But for all of us who have a monicum of self-reflection, we want to know, well, how do we relate to ourselves in the face of our own ignorance? What we are missing the mark on, what we don't realize we are carrying that's false about what's most important. So we could say Meno is a surrogate for us. He's playing our role, but also Socrates is playing our role. We aren't always in ignorance. We can step back and wonder and be curious. Now, this is the difference between ignorance and when we can function free of ignorance. When we're ignorant, we're certain. There's a certainty. It's the mark of the pathologos. A certain kind of certainty. I know this is the case, and I will fisticuffs anybody who disagrees with me. And then you do this. And you say, come on. Like that. Come on, man. Come on, man, I'll fight you. And if you have a lot of money, sometimes that, come on, man, I'll fight you, involves nuclear weapons. So, very simple, but depending on how much influence and power, can be devastating. So, what do? Well, that ignorance is marked by that certainty and that closed-mindedness, the inability to learn, even when talking to Socrates. But we also want to know, what's the other side? What can we step into? How do we step out of that way of being into Socrates' way of being? So Socrates is also our surrogate. When we can be open, be curious, be wondering, be rational, be self-reflective. All of these things are qualities that Socrates is embodying. Okay? So we can also be like that. Which is why in this whole podcast, the mantra we have is, where can we find questions? Where can we find puzzles? Where can we find things to be curious about? And finally, develop questions about, because that will get us out of certainty. It will allow our souls, ourselves, some psychic freedom for as long as we can maintain that question to function in a better way. Now, one of the questions we have is, what do we do with that freedom? Let's say we have a question that can make us curious and open for a while. Out of that certainty state of mind. I know that I'm like this. I know the world is like this. It doesn't have to be, it can be terribly negative. I know I'm rubbish. I know the world hates me. These are all marks of certainty. So when we can find a question that can take us out of that, what do we do with that freedom? Well, one thing we can do is engage in a dialectic, engage in a conversation with that certainty part of our psyche. That's what Socrates is doing. How do we relate to ourselves when we are not stuck in our problem? How do we talk with ourselves? Or how do we talk with our loved ones? How do we talk with our friends? So Socrates is also a model that we are learning about. How does Socrates relate? Now, he's already given us some direct information. He talked about the gentle way of the dialectic that you talk with friends. We need to treat ourselves as friends. And of course, there are people, if you are familiar with the human race, if you are familiar with the internet and streaming and posting things, being a creator on the internet, you know that there are people that Socrates calls the heuristic antagonistic. Heuristic means you use language to not to reach the truth together with others, but to win arguments, to obfuscate the truth, so in order to prove your own opinions. You use it as a technique to lie if it serves you. And he calls it heuristic and antagonistic. The heuristic and antagonistic. And of course, antagonistic means you just want to fight people. You're just angry. Using language to fight. Very juvenile, but very common. Because the anger we have, as we're reading in the Philosophical Midwifery series, we are all angry. Anger is a mark of an injustice. Think about it. When you're on the bus and someone bumps you and you think they shouldn't have, you can get angry. There's an injustice I suffered. You shouldn't have bumped into me. But then when you turn around and you see the person has a disability of some kind, then you think, oh, okay, I'm not angry anymore. This wasn't an injustice. It wasn't something that he should have done but didn't. So the anger goes. We have all suffered a fundamental injustice in our upbringing when we were in an open, receptive state of mind, called the pathologos origin scene. When we were open, and that's what we're reading about on our other series. We have picked up a false belief about self and reality and what's virtue and good and true. We picked up false beliefs about those things in a scene which was unjust. We were doing very, very well. We were going along swimmingly. We were in an open, receptive, curious state of mind, the very state of mind we are hoping to step out of Meno's certainty and into this open, curious state of mind, where we are using our language, not heuristically, but our language in our highest possible way to discover the self, to understand, not believe, to understand, and to even go beyond understanding to knowing. The very things that Socrates has been talking about, we were like that when we were young. But then somebody came along, that's what we're learning about in Philosophical Midwifery, and said, no, don't you dare, not in this house, which was a fundamental injustice. And then we replaced our wonder and curiosity for certainty. We replaced our questions for silence. We stopped using logos to discover and explore as children, to use logos to defend blindly this ignorance that we were just getting. Because, as we saw in the Meno, it offered us a place within our family, within our culture, within our school, within our relationships. It offered by accepting this false belief about what's most important, called the pathologos. We were offered a role and certain, a way of being and a role within these groups. That can be characterized by Meno. As Socrates pointed out, your family, your culture, your partner, your teacher, all of these reflect a certain way of being, which Socrates identified as a kind of certainty right at the start. Let's go all the way back. Meno said, hey, is virtue teachable? Assuming he knows what virtue is. That's ignorance. He doesn't. Oh, Socrates' response. This is your culture. You're a Thessalian. This is how you relate to the Hellenes. Different culture. This is your idea of wisdom. This is your partner. This is the other culture that's very similar to yours. This is your teacher. This is your family. This is your ignorance about what wisdom is. It's a habit of answering in a fearless and grand style, as if that benefits others. It's a certain idea of what it means to be knowing, how you use your knowing, whether and what you think benefits people. And all of those things that Socrates has characterized just from one sentence. Socrates is doing the opposite. He starts off by saying, I don't know what excellence is, but I'm willing to talk to you in a certain way that you haven't learnt yet, which is a tragedy. About virtue that you don't even know is non-physical. That's a comedic tragedy, says Socrates. Theatrical tragedy. Because part of education in this way leads you to an initiation to a non-physical realm. That's where you get your ideas, your definitions. Otherwise, you only look through your physical senses to physical things. You don't get definitions that way. You can point to examples, but that's many. Here's a beautiful thing, here's a beautiful thing, here's a beautiful thing. Well, what's beauty itself? You've never seen beauty itself. To go from the many to the one in order to have a definition requires a spiritual initiation. And that's what where is it? Here we go. Theatrically tragic requires an initiation. That's what Socrates is pointing out. So we're learning about two fundamental types of people that can represent aspects of our psyche. One, our ignorance and certainty, which makes us blind from learning new things. And one is Socrates. How does he relate to others? How does he relate to himself? And so, because we all have that fundamental ignorance we call the pathologos, we have anger. Why? Because our soul will not accept us Our soul will not accept an injustice. It will not allow us to spend our lives suffering from a false belief about ourselves and reality. So it will give us problems in order to direct our attention to it, but also it will make us angry. Now, the question is, what do we do with that anger? Where do we direct our attention? Do we lash out at others who disagree with our very ignorance that's causing our problems, that's causing our anger? Do we defend our problem like Meno is doing? Or what Socrates calls the heuristic and antagonistic people, the haters, the debate bros? If you ever create anything, you will see them come out in droves because they can't create anything, because they're blocked. So what do? Ask questions. How can I create something like you? How can I reach my dreams? No, those people don't do that. Instead, they try to kill it, destroy it, shit on it. It's what Socrates calls the heuristic and antagonistic. Heuristic means using language to not truthfully to debate, and antagonistic we call a hater. What's that? A simple misdirection of their own anger at their own inability to do something. Haters, we call them. Which is tragic because if they could step out of that Meno way of being into a Socrates way of being, they could ask questions. And if they are clever enough wise enough to learn the dialectic, they would know the structure of asking questions and answering questions and following a conversation. And then they could use that curiosity and that structure to ask questions about what's true and ask questions about the cause of their anger that's blocking them from their own ability to create. That's what they could do. That's what we can do by reading the text. That's what we're doing. We're learning about Socrates, his way of being, and his art. And we're asking the question, how does this art of dialectic and his way of being when he uses it, how does that relate to balloons? And how does it relate to virtue? What's virtue? The excellence of the soul, how we should live and how we should live in the best way. What's the best we can be as human beings? Another way of saying that is, what are we here for? If we're here to learn anything, to develop in any sort of way, what is that? And how does it relate to Socrates' way of being and state of mind and his functioning through this art called the dialectic? Okay, now, most people are not aware of that because they don't subscribe to this channel. And also because this translation of Socrates that is actually based on the ancient Greek has only been around for 10 years, and all of the past translations have been translated by people like Meno, who is not interested in truth or in discovering the cause of their ignorance, and then just project their ignorance onto the world, onto others. We call that projection, including their mistranslations of Socrates. So if you've been reading Socrates up until now, congratulations. You can now upgrade into a real translation. That's the Balboa translation we have, and it's free. And the Greek's there. Which means if you ever get stuck on a word, you can literally look it up, because we also have the internet. So no gatekeeping. You don't have to be a Greek scholar. You don't have to pay thousands of dollars at college, and you don't have to blindly follow the ignorance of past translators who themselves have been projecting their own false beliefs. We can actually discover the text for ourselves and reawaken philosophy. And whenever we say reawaken philosophy, we say yay, because that's the name of the channel. So how does this way of being and way of asking questions, how does it relate to justice, what we should be doing here? And how can we recognize when we fall out of that into someone like Meno? Where does he say it in the text? He says, heuristic and antagonistic. It's such a good way of saying it. Here we go. Yeah. If the questioner was one of those people who call themselves wise, but are actually heuristic and antagonistic, haters, arguers, debaters, they're just not interested in truth. What are they interested in? Projecting their ignorance onto others, getting angry about that, and using their language and their life energy to hate. Haters. And if you've ever created anything on the internet, you know them. Just by doing something, you trigger their anger. Why? Because they can't. Why? Because they, like Meno, are carrying a false belief about themselves that limit them. That's called the pathologos. That's what we read in the midwifery series that you can find on YouTube. And instead of learning this art of dialectic to converse with themselves, to uncover the false beliefs, understand it and remove it, instead, tragically, they blindly defend it, project it onto others. You are just like me. And then project that anger onto that person. Why? Because all anger is about an injustice, and our fundamental anger that rules our life causes us to be trapped in our fate. That is what we're projecting onto others, that injustice. You are just like that person. And instead of being angry at the person I'm really angry at, I'm angry at you, even though you're not that person. It's projection. That's not the best way of dealing with our anger. What is? Well, that's what we're learning here. Have you ever been like that? By the way, that's the conservative movement. That's the right wing. You wonder, well, how come right wingers support fascism so much? because they think it's fascism for their group. They want to be the authorities. Why? Because they're afraid of being the minority. Why? What's wrong with happen to be in a minority? Who cares? Philosophers are in the minority. Because they're afraid of being treated the same way they treat minorities. The pathologos attacks anything different than the family clan. So anyone different, they attack, and they feel justified. This is their anger. Instead of addressing the cause of their anger, they provide themselves temporary alleviation by being the bully. Sadistic. And because they can't reflect, they haven't learned how to reflect because of their block, they assume or they project that desire for sadistic fascism on everyone else. So they are deathly afraid of being the minority because they think everyone else will treat them with such disgusting vileness the same way they want to treat others. Everyone's just like me. All conservatives think that. All right-wingers think that. Everyone's just like me. That's why there's that famous saying, every accusation of a right-winger is a confession. Famously. Oh, they're evil homosexuals. Well, then the person making that accusation in the right wing turns out to be a homosexual themselves. It's so common. It's boring now. Why? It's projection of themselves. And because it's an injustice that they have suffered themselves, they are angry about it. They're only attacking the wrong person. And specifically, what's really curious is the nature of the pathologos is it attacks things that threaten that ignorant belief, even though it's the cause of their problems and the cause of their anger and causing their blindness. They can only see projections, they can't see reality, including past translators of Socrates. Even though it's all that causing all that problem, they defend it. They defend it because they think it's true. They defend the very thing that's causing all their problems. But because it's causing problems, they are unsettled within their soul and they have anger. And instead of finding the cause of that anger, they use that anger to attack the very thing that can free them from their problems, which is the dialectic. Reason, reflection, self-reflection, looking at the problems to find its cause, understanding the origin of that cause, understanding it sufficiently in relation to actual truth to see it's not true, irrational, harmful, so you can free yourself from it. That's the way of becoming better, healing, growing, developing. That's the very thing these heuristic, antagonistic people direct their anger towards, which is ironically tragic. But the dialectic applied to that's philosophical midwifery. We are seeing somebody who has lived that way, Meno. And we are seeing someone, Socrates, try and relate to him in a new kind of a way. So Socrates is doing two things: defining what true virtue would be, as well as demonstrating it. How does he relate to Meno? Does he claim to know like Meno does? Nope. He claims to not know. Meno tries to mock him for not knowing. What does Socrates do? Mock him back? No. He said, yeah, I haven't met anyone who knows. I'm happy with not knowing. And Meno's like, what about my teacher? Haven't you met him? Yeah, I've met him. Which means his teacher was ignorant too. So what? Did he win the debate and then cheer for himself and get high fives from all of his bros and then post it on YouTube to get 500,000 views and then use it to promote his new soft drink for children? Nope. He said, well, let's talk. Let's reflect. If you are one of those heuristic and antagonistic haters that leave comments on YouTube, then I would say, look, I've told the truth. It's your job to use the logos to refute me. Don't just say, oh, well, I disagree, or you stink. That's not using the logos. That's not reason. You're projecting. Use the reason, use the logos, show an understanding of understanding to say, where has the argument missed the mark? And provide what's true, which would require some reflection and understanding. You can't just throw out buzzwords like you stink or whatever the buzzword. You're skibbity. You haven't, your video is L because you're skibbity and whatever. But if we were friends, which we are hoping to develop in this channel, people who are genuinely interested in understanding themselves, genuinely interested in discovering the meaning of life and living that way, becoming the excellence of soul, understanding virtue, understanding how to relate to themselves in the more gentle way as friends. How do you treat yourself as a friend? How do you stop being heuristic and antagonistic to yourself? Stop being a hater on yourself. Treat yourself nicely. If that's who you are, then you are a friend. And that very same way that you are learning to relate to yourself, you can practice with your friends. Practice relating to your friends in a friendly way. What is that friendly way? That's what we're learning. And that's why we have this channel, because this friendly way that might be the excellence of being a human being is not taught anywhere. Why? Because the person who was teaching it was murdered. His name was Socrates. After he was murdered, some of his students started the first universities in the West. After a few hundred years, they were murdered by someone like Meno, someone who was attacking understanding and dialectic, because that makes us compassionate, free, rational, evolves us. But what are the heuristic and antagonistic people like? Fascists. They want people to simply believe them, agree with their own opinions. Again, not understanding, not knowledge, not wisdom, not direct experience, opinions. That was Emperor Justinian in 529 AD, murdering the philosophers who were interested in this, and replace it with just believe in what we say. Formerly religion, Christianity. And that's the tradition that we're in. So we are picking up the text to discover what is this more friendly way that we relate to ourselves and our friends as friends, and ask the question, how does that relate to virtue? Okay, interesting and cool and fun. That's the one I was looking for. I don't want to eat a monkey. I want to do this. So where we are in the text is, given that Meno's ignorance prevented him from accepting the conclusions about what virtue is, even though we went through the dialectic, virtue is, let's review. Virtue was, using the first dialectic, the Meno, here we are. Virtue was, where is the dialectic on definition of virtue? Over here. Virtue or excellence of our soul is a single eidos in being, so you can actually know it by perceiving it through the sense that's called ousia, not a physical sense, but it's a sense we have, which means it's knowable and understandable. It's not a matter of belief. It's an eidos. We function with it to keep. What's that? Okay, we keep our eye on it in a dialectic, so we're learning about this friendly, good way of being. Keep your eye on being when you have this dialectic. Don't keep your eye on the physical world. Because you're going to find a lot of heuristic and antagonistic haters who are so stuck in their problem and projecting their anger that it's going to be frustrating. You want to keep your eye on truth. And by the way, you are asking questions and answers about truth. So keep your eye on the aspect of being. By the way, whether you're a man or a woman, it's the same. The same virtue for men and women. What's virtue? What's the excellence of the soul? The excellence of the soul is an aspect of being you keep your eye on when you have conversations with yourself and others, whether you're a man or a woman. So already sexism is out the window, racism is out the window, all that other juvenile nonsense is out the window, because we are all souls, which means we all have minds, which means we can all direct our mind to the non-physical realm of being, understand it, keep our eye on it when we ask questions about it, which is where we get our definitions from. If you're just looking in your physical senses, you can only see examples. Someone says, hey, what's beauty? That thing, and that thing, and that thing. Is that a definition? Is that one definition, or is it many examples? If you want the one, you have to go to being, which is great because it kicks ass. It's a blissful feeling. It's a relieving feeling. That's why people get into spirituality. It's cool. But we are demystifying it. We're just using it rationally. Men and women, same. And the reasoning that we followed, hey, is health an idea? Size, strength, is that the same for men and women? Therefore, all ideas that exist are the same for men and women. Therefore, the idea of virtue has to be the same of men and women. Therefore, taking that back to the start, it's a single idea that does not differ. So we're discovering that virtue is something eternal. So you can't say, oh, virtue for this country is different from this country, or in the past it was right, it was virtuous to have slaves, but it's changed now. So the Bible wasn't wrong, it was just different back then. Or someone said, well, it was a different time back then. It was okay to beat the students in a classroom. It was a different time. That's not the case, because it doesn't differ. It's eternal, universal. So we're learning about definitions and we're learning about virtue. The next one was the dialectic on how we use virtue to manage things well. So we're talking today about managing ourselves. How do we relate to ourselves? How do we be a good manager to ourselves, especially when we're stuck, when we're like Meno, when we're angry or certain about something, especially certain about our unworthiness. I'm certain I could never reach that goal. I'm certain the world will stop me if I pursue my dreams or whatever. How do we relate to that? Do we say, how do you know you're certain? You stink. Sit in the corner. Is that a good way of being a manager to yourself? How do you manage well? Notice we said already, well, the way that Socrates is saying, he wants to relate better to Meno as a friend and not as to an heuristic and antagonistic person, is through the art of the dialectic. Here, what we just saw... Oh my God. What we just saw in... My mouse is not being fun. What we just saw here Was the definition of virtue as a single eidos that doesn't change for men and women or anyone, that you keep your eye on in dialectic. Didn't go into much detail about what the dialectic is, only that it's essential for it. And here we're saying it's managing well. We've already said that, hey, managing well, that's probably the dialectic, maybe. All right. If you do that, you need temperance and justice. If you whatever it is to manage well, we haven't really figured that out yet. Doing it at all times, it's justice. It's a well ordering. So if you're managing yourself in this kind of way, you are creating temperance or order within yourself. You are ordering yourself well. If you do it, you will get success. If you don't, you will get failure and not reach the good. So something about this managing well, which orders us and is the right thing to do, helps us to reach the good. If we don't have it, by the way, and if this way of managing ourselves well to make us ordered and make us just and reach the good, if it didn't exist in being as a paradigm, then it wouldn't be the same for everyone. You'd manage some people well by yelling at them and other people well by doing the dialectic. You manage some people well by genociding them and keeping them as slaves or whatever. So that's what would follow if it wasn't the case. Therefore, we conclude that what virtue is managing the self. Because some people, like slaves or children, don't have a city to manage. It's managing yourself well, and if you're doing it, you're doing justice. So if you're doing your best, whatever this virtue turns out to be, if you're applying it to yourself at all times, you have a standard for justice. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever incarnation you are. Then we got the paradigm, or we got examples of the dialectic applied to color and shape. To show that you use the dialectic to start from somewhere where you are at, to move to somewhere you don't know. So start from things you can see. For Meno, it's just physical things. Have you seen physical color? Yes. Well, color comes from the eidos, the aspects of pure being that are non-physical. And it's symmetrical with our sense perceptions so we can perceive color. But color comes from shape, and shapes exist eternally. So they're knowable eternally. Meno liked that one because he was more familiar with physical things than he was ideas. Why is my computer doing funny things? All right, so that's where we are in the text. Now, Meno couldn't use that model that we have been learning. So instead, Socrates said, well, okay, we'll give it a shot. Again, we're learning about how to relate to people and ourselves. Give it a shot. Invite someone to give it a try. Meno says, okay, I'm going to give a quote, something that I already agree with. This poet who says, desiring beautiful things and to be able to acquire them. And then Socrates starts his work. Okay, let's start from there. So it's one way of using the dialectic. You could start from truth and reason up to it, as Socrates did twice, effectively, well, did it well, Meno came along every step of the way, but he wasn't satisfied with the conclusion. Another way of going is start from where the person is. This is my idea of what it means to be just. Virtuous. Desiring beautiful things and being able to acquire them. So let's write that down. Now, we're also looking for the dialectic within the text. So we could say, is this the division section of the text? I don't know. Or maybe that section of dividing the dialectic up into color and shape is the division section, and this is the conclusion. Or maybe this is the next section. Maybe this is section 2. So we had section 1, we had Socrates giving a definition, dialectic. Then he gave a demonstration. How do you demonstrate? How do you use virtue? Managing the self well, justly, always, to reach the good. Demonstration. Dialectic. Then he did division, dialectics on color and shape and sense perception. And then his conclusion. What was his conclusion? Now, maybe I should leave that up to you. Can you see in the text something that takes all of these and he comes to a conclusion? Now, you could say, well, he came to a conclusion about Meno. Came to a conclusion about Meno. That he was uninitiated. That's his problem. Or you could say he came to a conclusion about the dialectic. Which was the paradigm. If all we've been talking about today, how do we treat ourselves well? How do we treat our friends well? How do we evolve to the next stage of humanity? How do we stop with the division and war? How do we stop being a hater? How do we stop projecting our anger onto others? How do we stop being a heuristic or antagonistic hater and jerk to people? Well, there should be a model for what we should be doing instead, which should have steps that you can follow. Paradigm, that's called. A model or paradigm for how to remove those negative things and be the friendly way, the good way. Perhaps the virtuous way, maybe. That's a question. How does this relate to virtue? Still carrying that. Now, your job is to wonder and maybe do some work, if you want. What does this mean? If this was his conclusion, that Meno was comically, tragically uninitiated, what does that mean? Why is this uninitiation related to the definition of virtue. The dialectic he did to define virtue was itself a definition of virtue. How does initiation relate to virtue? See, the nature of the conclusion within the dialectic is it has to go back to the start, which is others back to self, remember? So your question is, go back to the dialectic on definition, or the definition dialectic of virtue. Come to your own conclusion about it. And now, after having gone through that reflection of that conversation with Meno, if the conclusion was he is uninitiated, ask the question, how does initiation relate to the definition of virtue? Your other job is, another conclusion he came to in this step was, here is the paradigm. So another question for you to wonder about is, how does paradigm relate to the definition of virtue? Why is a paradigm necessary? What is a paradigm? That's for you. Now, now we're in section 2, which starts with, now you could say we're doing our best to see the dialectic wherever we can. If we notice there are sections in the text, we can create a hypothesis. Can we understand those sections using the dialectic itself? Can we say this is section 1, the definition section? Is all this needed as a definition? And then how does our conclusion relate to this as a whole? Okay, section 2, would that make section 2, therefore, the demonstration section? Are we in the demonstration section? Well, it started with Socrates saying, let's look at it in the text. Socrates says, okay, you have received the paradigm from me. Stop making many out of the one. Stop giving me many examples of physical things that you call virtue, but give me one definition. What is virtue as a whole? I've given you the paradigm. Have a go. So Socrates is saying, demonstrate the paradigm. Socrates is saying, demonstrate the paradigm. Meno. So we could say, maybe this is the demonstration section. That could be where we're at. Now, it starts with Meno saying, quoting a poet he likes or agrees with. Or agrees with. That's how it starts, which was to desire beautiful things, who doesn't desire beautiful things? Everyone does. That's the nature of beauty. In philosophy, we seek to desire beauty itself, the most beautiful thing. So we're all desiring beautiful things. We're all in the game, same video game, but only a few of us are saying, well, what's the actual final treasure? What's the one piece? What's the big treasure? Because that's philosophy. What's beauty itself? And how do we actually attain it? That's philosophy. How do we go from the many to the one, as Socrates just said? Desire, beautiful. Now notice, in philosophy, we desire self-beauty or beauty itself. Meno says, desire beautiful things. Desire beautiful things. Notice, things. Not what we're after in philosophy. It's not how you're going to get a definition. And then if virtue is a being that you keep your eye on when doing the dialectic at all times, which is managing yourself well, and if you're doing that all the time, that's just, and that's the only way you'll reach the good. And it's not a thing. Uh-oh. Desire beautiful things. And be able to acquire them. That's the quote that he agrees with already. Do you know anyone who thinks like that? You ask them what's true, and instead of using some sort of paradigm or model to seek what will be true for always for everyone, they just quote some poet that they selectively quote a part of a poet or part of a poetry text or a part of a religious text that happens to be what they already agree with anyway, completely sidestepping the process of finding truth, assuming they already know it. And then you say, well, what makes it true? Just because this poet says it? I don't know. Kicking the can down the road instead of actually saying, this is the steps of reasoning, this is the model that anyone can follow that I'm going to lead you through so that we can come to a true understanding. Instead of doing that, we're just going to quote someone else and just presume that they followed some sort of model, presume that they followed the paradigm to truth. Do you know people like that? Okay. What did Socrates do with this quote? Socrates says, do you mean by desiring beautiful things your desire of good things? He's taking the words he's given and he is evolving them from beautiful to good. He's getting to the essence of it. Okay, he's taken beautiful to good. And as a question, do you agree that this is what you actually mean? Now, this is interesting because when you go to a doctor, you might say, oh, I've got a sore arm. And your doctor will use his artfulness and knowledge of the paradigm of medicine and say, oh, do you mean your fibia? Because there are lots of parts of the arm. Right, we can accept this. So do you mean your fibia or your elbow or your shoulder? Whatever. So Socrates is doing that too. Do you mean good? Desire beautiful things. One who desires beautiful things, they're a desire of the good, of good things. Again, staying with things, not saying the good or good itself or goodness. Not saying a noun, still on things. So he's keeping the words, just changing one. Kind of like Wordle. That's popular right now at the time of this recording, which is a game where you change one letter, I think. I don't know. I don't play Wordle. But I think it's a game where you have like 5 letters and then you change one and then you have to. No, that's not Wordle. Okay, there's another game like Wordle where you. My mouse isn't working. There's a game where you. There we go. There's a game where you get like, I don't know, a word, and then you have to, is that a good word? Then you have to change one letter of it each time. So what would that be? Okay, let's not use a plural. Let's say dope. You change one letter. Okay, I haven't played this game, so I'm not good at it right off the bat. Pope. See, notice I changed one letter. And then you go from Pope to change one letter. Poor. And then you go from P-A-R-E. Is that a word? Okay, I don't know if pear, I don't know if that's how you spell pear. P-O-R-T. And then you go from that to P-E-R-T. And actually, each time you change one letter, and you've gone from dope to pert. That's a game that some people play on their phones. Now, Socrates has taken desiring beautiful things, he's kept the word things, and he's just changing beautiful to good. So now we see Socrates taking beautiful. So the sock with his art. Socrates with what we are assuming is art. Socrates' art. Question mark is a question. Does he have an art? Is it knowledge? Is it virtue? All these questions we're asking. He says from beautiful to good. That's the next step. So we've got step 1. Step 1. Step 2. Now let's see what step 3 is. Maybe not use that color. What color? 1, 2, 3. Let's see what number 3 is. Okay. Accordingly then, ara. Now there's a meme about ara as well. It's a Japanese word that means something. Ara. Now ara in Greek means and therefore or accordingly then. Accordingly then, since some people are desirous of bad things while others desire good things, not all human beings, my good man. Interesting. Why does he see he's introduced this word good, but then he uses it informally as well. I wonder if that is part of his bedside manner. I'm introducing this foreign word. Meno, you're not used to using the word good for interesting reasons to do with his education. You're interested in beautiful things. You are a beautiful man after all, which is why you get away with making the demands. We saw that earlier. So here I am introducing something new, but maybe part of charm, his bedside manner, is using it colloquially. Like maybe a doctor will say, oh, you got a sore arm? Do you mean it's your femur? And then he might say, oh, by the way, femur, femur, I barely know. No, that's terrible. Okay, he might he might use the word femur in a joke or in a sentence like, my friend asked me if I could femur. I didn't know anywhere to go with that. Okay, let's use a different example. I don't know. I don't know how a doctor would use it. Because here he's saying, hey, you mean the good? Well, my good man. It's okay, you're a good man. We can just use it. It's not a foreign idea. Do you mean, is your arm sore or is it your elbow? That's okay, I bump my elbow all the time. Speaking of elbows, I was waiting in line for the Taylor Swift concert and the girl behind me was elbowing me to get in front of me. I don't know. Maybe this is part of the friendly way of relating. When we introduce a new idea, we talk about it familiarly, in a familiar way. I don't know. These are questions. Things to wonder about. Not all human beings, my good man, appear to desire good things. Not as far as I'm concerned. Some desire bad things. Yes. Okay, now this is interesting. Socrates is anticipating the kind of way of thinking of Meno. Because he is saying, hey, by the way, haven't you noticed that some people appear to desire good things? I don't know if he can see it or if it's just a standard paradigm that you can follow. But he is saying appearance appears appears that some men desire bad things. So notice the word good has been replaced this time. So we can say, so on our example, we have the purple letters have been the letters that have been changed. So let's use the purple over here. Whoa, sorry guys. Okay, this is what I did. I started like this. So part 3 is it appears that some men desire bad things. And I put it in purple because that signifies the one letter, or in this case, the one word that has changed. And so we changed beautiful to the good. So I just changed the color of the word good to be purple because over here, it's the purple ones that changed. See? And this is interesting because The whole dialectic is to go from appearances to reality, from the physical to the non-physical, to the sense perception to noesis, the perception of what's real, eternity, the metaphysical realm, mind itself, consciousness itself. So we're going from appearances. So perhaps the word things gave it away because things are appearances. Perhaps the previous part of the text where Meno says, I don't like the dialectics where you talk about being. I like the dialectics where you explain physical things like color in relation to sense perception. For whatever the reason, Socrates realizes he's in the realm of appearances. You could call it a diagnosis. So let's relate it to a doctor. Someone comes in, he's got bloodshot eyes, he has like spotches over on his skin that indicates liver damage. Doctor goes, okay, this guy is probably an alcoholic. So I'm going to start where he's at and talk to him from there and diagnose and treat him in relation to where I see his problem is or where I see he's at. So we're going into great detail to learn this because it's Socrates. There's a reason why he's called the father of Western thought. It's a reason why he said, it has said all things since Socrates is but a footnote to Socrates. I mean, these are quotes that we accept, but if that's the case, then why aren't we studying him? Like, why aren't we not looking at it in detail? Why do we put all our attention to going through in detail Steph Curry's shooting percentage or Tom Brady's winning percentage or whatever, and not Socrates? If everybody acknowledges, okay, it doesn't matter that everyone acknowledges, it matters that it's true that Socrates is perhaps the best, most evolved person to walk the planet. And he himself says, yeah, I've completed my work here. I'm not coming back. So if this is an example, a demonstration of someone who has understood the meaning of life, accomplished the meaning of life, and set out the paradigm for us to complete the meaning of life, that we have to, he's not going to tell us, because we're not a petty tyrant, spoiled brat like Meno, but he's going to give us the pieces for us to work out for ourselves how to do that. If that's the case, why are we not doing this every day? Every day on TV, at school, at the workplace. Wouldn't that be rational and mature? Well, yes, it would. And that's why we do it every day on this channel. So, I got one of my first heuristic and antagonistic commenters on YouTube yesterday, or... yeah, yesterday? I think they deleted it very quickly after. They're like, you post every day. How is that going to get you followers? Don't you want followers? And I said, what kind of a question is that? No, I don't want people to share in the logos to evolve their soul and create a better planet for all of us. That would be a terrible thing. I create this content so people don't see it. That's not a question, my friend. But the only content was you post every day. So, I mean, I wanted him to share his real question. Are you selling me something? I get some bots sometimes saying, pay us money and we'll give you the appearance of followers. Appearance. Things, bots. To make it look like you've got a successful channel. Now, I know that the right-wing grifters and, the griftosphere does that. I don't want bots following me. I'm not Elon Musk. I don't know if he was selling that or if something that he saw in the content triggered that natural anger we have because it was rational and therefore a threat to his own unsuspected false beliefs. I have some people on the channel like that. People who have, sometimes from strong religious communities, they can't find any fault with the content, so they will attack aesthetics. I don't like your thumbnails, or I don't like your big nose. No one said that. I don't like the backgrounds. It's a lovely beach in ancient Greece. Who could not love that? Or I don't like how often you post or something. Again, these are distractions. Distractions function to take away from the dialectic and the logos in question. Sabotage. Okay, put off your life work for another day to get into an argument over nothing. You're going to pick it up tomorrow? Tomorrow are you going to be ready? What about the next time? What about the next day? You're going to have to reincarnate? Are you certain you're going to come back as a human being? Are you certain you're going to come back where you have the opportunity to reflect with a philosopher to discover the meaning of life and fulfill it? You're not certain. So why put it off for one day? Why put it off for one lifetime? Why put it off for one conversation? To talk about my lovely beach border or how often I post. Who cares? What do you see about the meaning of life? What do you see about the dialectic? What do you see about Meno? What questions have you discovered for yourself? What have you found to be wondering about that's got you out of your Meno certainty for a little bit? Or how many minutes do you want to pretend that that's not important and engage in some heuristic and antagonistic bullshit about nonsense? Or do you have a question about why you're attracted to heuristic and antagonistic bullshit about nonsense? Because you're angry, because something true might threaten your dearly held false beliefs like Meno has that are tied to his father and his culture and his religion and his lover and his teacher, all of whom are beloved. So something Socrates is saying would be a challenge to them. What happens when our deeply held traditions and our role within a family, especially if we are given a lot of thumbs up and pats on the head by our family for towing the family line, towing the religious line, towing the school line. Lots of kisses from your partner if you toe the line. That's under threat if you reason sometimes and reflect about yourself and you discover the truth, discover that that's keeping you bound in ignorance and vice and not virtue, keeping you stuck, keeping you miserable, really. The logos, the good way of being through the dialectic that you are here to do, that's a kind of education and nurture that will always lead you to the good and therefore is universal and doesn't change whether you're a man or a woman. That allows you to manage yourself create order or temperance within yourself and always acting justly. That would therefore be a kind of education and nurture that you are here for because you aren't going to be on this planet. You're not going to be a Jew forever. You're not going to be a Catholic forever. So why defend Catholic? Why defend Judaism? You know your life's going to end after a certain amount of years. You think you take that with you? Why defend that as opposed to learning a kind of education and nurture that is about the eternal, that's always just, that is managing yourself well, that you can take with you into your reincarnation, that will determine a better reincarnation, and that you can actually understand and verify for yourself directly in the experience of virtue itself in this lifetime. Seems immature and irrational to defend what causes your problems and not seek what will bring you wonder, joy, knowledge, truth, development, evolution, and so on. Seems immature and irrational. That's a big question. That's one of the big questions we explore in philosophical midwifery. Why am I attracted to doing what harms me? And can we see something about that question in Meno? How is Meno responding to Socrates? And what does Socrates do in response? How do we respond to our haters? Now, if they are of, maybe Meno is that friendly kind, in which case it's dialectic, but the heuristic and antagonistic kind, Socrates says, hey, it's your job to take up the logos and refute me. You can't just say, oh, I disagree. You can't just say, oh, I don't like you, or I don't like your aesthetics. I don't like your thumbnails or whatever. That's not taking up the logos to refute the argument itself. It's your job. So what? So what's your real question? Your real question is, why am I so angry that I'm going to distract myself from the content of the videos to talk about something insignificant and meaningless? What really triggered me? Because that thing that triggered you is your starting point. Meno is giving us his starting point. This is my starting point. My belief about virtue is to desire beautiful things and have to be able to acquire them. That's where I'm starting from. When you lose the logos to get into bickering or nonsense as an heuristic and antagonistic hater on YouTube or whatever, that's where you go back to. Because that's where you lose the logos. That's where your block is. Now go back. If you want to address your anger, do it in philosophical midwifery. We have that series on the channel. But if you can put aside your certainty and anger, because there must be some certainty behind your anger. Like if you don't know who bumped you in the train, and it could be a child or it could be some jerk, then you're not sure yet. So you're not angry yet until you see, oh, it's just a child, I'm not angry. Oh, it's an adult, I am angry. There's some certainty involved. Put aside that certainty of Meno and that anger and go back to the logos and make your comment about the content. Not just this is what I'm angry about, but this is what I'm curious about. What in the content were you curious about? Are you wondering about? Number one. Number two, do some work. Use the dialectic to phrase your question. Put on your big boy pants or your big girl dress. Girls can wear pants too. Put on your big girl pants. In other words, Socrates says, hey, Meno, even a blindfolded person can tell that you're from a rich family and you're good looking because you're throwing around demands. How about you do some work? How about you use the paradigm that we've just outlined and phrase your question or your puzzle about virtue using that? So too to anybody watching this channel. I disagree with this. Who gives a shit about your dumb opinions? Find a question, because you can share a question. It can take you out of your ignorance. To be wondering like Socrates. He said, I don't know, right at the beginning, he said, I don't know virtue. Be like that. Number one. Number two, once you've found a question, do some work. Or have some integrity. Phrase your question as best you can. You don't have to be perfect. That's what we saw in our dialectic on how we use virtue. How we demonstrate it. If the dialectic is what we're seeing manages well, then we're seeing that justice is using it at all times. If you do it, you'll be more likely to reach the good. And if you're trying your best to structure your questions or even your answers, but really questions, your wonder, your questions, your hypotheses, if you're doing your best to structure them in this dialectic, you will always be acting justly. Says this dialectic that Socrates walked us through already. So even if you're new to this, and you want to leave a comment, try your best to use DDDAS. Definition, demonstration, division. All right, so I had to restart the recording for a second because I ran out of space on my computer. But going back, so what we're saying is, if you're doing your best to find a question, find something to be wondering about, something that you're genuinely curious about, you're excited about. It doesn't have to be excited. If it's anger, you could be genuinely wondering about what's the cause of your anger. You could be excited about discovering the cause because you know that if you do use the dialectic on the cause of your anger, you can become free. That could be exciting. But simply, it could be a wonder. What are you excited about, passionate about, curious, that causes curiosity and wonder? Find something to be curious and wondering about. Find a question. Do your best to arrange or manage your question using the dialectic, and you'll be acting justly. So, same for comments on this on YouTube. Don't be a heuristic and antagonistic person. Find a question and do your best to structure it in the dialect. You don't have to be perfect. Just have to be doing your best to be as excellent as you can, based on where you're at. There we go. So what? So that's what we were talking about with posting every day. If it's true what people say about Socrates, that he is the father of Western thought and everything is but a footnote to him, and if that's true, if we respect him so highly, then we should listen to what he says in the Phaedo when he says, I've done my work here, you do it now, and if you don't, it's going to keep you chained to your problems, chained to the suffering in mankind, war, division, disharmony, and is going to keep you chained to your disharmony within your soul, and it's going to keep you chained in the prison of reincarnation if you don't do what you're here to do. A kind of education and nurture that applies eternally to being for all people. Learn and do that. Then why aren't we doing it? Well, what is it? Well, hasn't that been what we've just been seeing in the Meno? That virtue is some sort of thing that you can do that's always the same to reach the good, that you should be doing it at all times, justice. That doesn't differ. Doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or a slave or a child. That exists in being. That involves your focus to the dialectic. So whatever that thing is that the great Socrates is telling us to do at all times and master, seems to be what we're reading about here. So does all times mean once a week? Does all times mean once a month? Even if that will work the algorithm in my favor to get more followers? No, all times means all times, my friend. So I'm doing my best to provide these videos every day. And, well, not every day, because I have to find other ways of earning money, because I'm not getting any money from this. It's costing me money, but it's fine. Maybe one day when the world picks up on it, I'll be able to do this full time. Maybe not. But as much as I can, at least, I try and do it as much as I can and provide the community that you can take part as well. There's a Discord you can join for free. We have some fantastic members that you can join live on Twitch and on YouTube. You have a choice of both, whatever you prefer. And it's something that we're doing every day, which just seems like the rational thing to do. If Socrates is as great as everyone says he is, then, you know, he wasn't great because of how fast he could run the 100-meter sprint. He wasn't great because how far he could throw a football. He was great because of the things he said. So if he's supposed to be the greatest person ever and the wisest philosopher ever and the father of Western thought ever, and nothing we have done since him has been anything but a footnote. All of that's true, by the way. It seems to be the footnote thing especially, which we're seeing for ourselves why. then all of that praise is because of what he said. So why don't we listen to what he said? That seems mental. And what he's saying is, do this. Master the art of dialectic. What you're here for. Always. So, and by the way, I'm going to give you the material. You don't have to go on an adventure to the Himalayas on a hike to find the hidden scroll. I mean, thankfully we have the Balboa translation, and it's just you have the scroll. It's right here. And you can have your own, link below, for free. You don't have to sit on a mat for 40 years before I give it to you. You don't have to reach a certain level of enlightenment before I take you to the back room and Dokusan and say, oh, here is the ancient scroll. You don't have to become a Freemason for 50 years before I give you the ancient scroll. You don't have to become a master of Greek. Like I know a little bit of ancient Greek, and the rest of it I'm figuring out by using the internet as we go. And we have a pretty damn good translation for once. No gatekeeping. You have the scroll. You don't have to go out of the scroll. It's literally in here. If it's a decent work, if Socrates is so great, then it should be answered within the text itself. So this is what he's saying. And he's not only saying it, he's doing it. So that's why we're taking the time to not only follow it as a Meno, but study it as a Socrates as well. We are also Socrates. We are both Meno and Socrates. In other words, looking at how he just changes one word, looking at how he keeps the language the same as Meno, looking at how he says, my good man, keeps it friendly, and he's using the word good, the new word he's introduced. Looking at how he can figure out, oh, okay, this guy's stuck in appearances, you know, which is where a lot of us are, a lot of people are. So let's say, okay, doesn't it appear? I'm going to use that word appearances. Doesn't it appear? Because he's saying, look, virtue is seeking good things. But isn't that, Socrates could probably say, well, that can't be a very good definition of virtue, because don't we all seek good things? Isn't that a truism? If we're looking for the excellence of the soul, which would have, you know, virtue, which would mean it has its vice, has its opposite. Is it good to seek beautiful things, or do we always seek beautiful things? So there's something wrong here. Diagnosis. What's wrong? Okay, it might appear to him that some people desire bad things, which is of course what they teach us. Bad guys in movies, right? Bad countries that we invade, bad people we put in prison. Oh, but actually prison is actually a way of punishing the poor, but actually is really there so we can, so capitalist fascist tyrants can exploit them for slave labor. That's really what the prison system is about. Oh. Is that true? Oh. That there aren't actually bad people desiring bad things? But what about evil? But what about shooting them or bombing them? Right? Oh, we all seek good things? So all punishment and war and exploitation is irrational and immature and a lack of understanding and virtue? Oh. Where did we start there? It appears, doesn't it, Meno? Not all human beings, my good man, appear to desire good things. Some appear to desire bad things. Yes. Okay? That's the next step. Do you mean, so okay, that's where we're at. Do you mean that they think the bad things are good, or by recognizing that they are bad? And then even though they recognize it's bad, they go on desiring it. Both. Okay, so we've defined his problem. Now this could be demonstration maybe, or the division. Here are the two divisions. Okay, if that's the case, if people desire bad things, we have two options. Is it because of A, they think, zoom in a bit. Come on, mouse. They think bad things are good, or B, a different color. What color? They actually recognize and what's the difference between thinking and recognition? They recognize they are bad, but still desire sells. Those are options. Do people do bad things because they think that they're actually good, or because they recognize that they're bad, but they still want those bad things? So this is a problem of ignorance, or being convinced something that ain't true. Fundamentally could be that cause of the anger that we've been talking about. Cause of us acting unjustly to have a false belief underlying our problems. This, you actually know it's bad, but you desire it anyway. You got to come up with some explanation. Why would you want bad things? That's the fairy tale of evil. Oh, because there's this force in the universe that just wants bad things. It's called evil and the devil. And then all we have to do if we want to violently oppress and exploit people, acting out our badness, is just give a name that calls the other team evil. Or they're evil heathens, they're evil terrorists, they're evil heathens, or infidels, whatever you want. What makes them evil? Because they actually know they're something, but there's something inherently screwed up about their nature that they can't be helped. Because they desire bad things. Which is freaking stupid if you think about it. What human being desires bad things? You want to eat the bad sandwich? You want to eat the rotten sandwich? No, of course not. Think of a child. You want to eat they want to eat the ice cream because they think it tastes good. But they don't want to eat the ice cream covered in dirt, or they don't want to eat the moldy sandwich. No one wants the bad sandwich. They want the good sandwich. Okay, but it does require, it seems obvious when you say it, but you have to reason it through, because there's a certain level where the logos falls down. Everyone desires the good porridge. Everyone desires the good sandwich. Everyone desires to watch the good movie. Everyone desires the good car that actually works, not the bad car that's broken. Everyone desires to eat the good water, not the poison water from the fracking company or whatever. Everyone desires to have a good job. Everyone desires to feel like they're doing good. But here, some people don't seek the good when it comes to what? Where do you draw the line? Politics, religion, spirituality? Usually that's where it comes in, because these are the things that are about the self and reality. the very things that grifters want to deny you can understand, and you have to believe them. And anyone who disagrees with them, that's this line. They are these sorts of people who don't desire the good self in reality. Because if they did, and I was someone selling my spiritual course or religion or holy book or whatever, then I should be able to reason with them to help everyone come into a unified understanding of what's good about self and reality. If not, I can blame my own inability to use the art of the dialectic and logos, or I could blame their natures. Yeah, my arguments were sufficient by saying, just believe in Jesus. It's your fault. You're the devil. You're the devil is what you are. Or, no, I can't even reason with you. We just got to shoot you and genocide you because, yeah, even if I did give you a reason, then you wouldn't understand because you're just the evil. You don't desire goodness. You're not the chosen ones. The chosen ones are the people who agree with me because that's what's good, believing whatever I say. Because I wear the funny hat. Okay, so at what point? But again, Socrates we're going to see how Socrates, now the way that I said it might make sense to people listening because they're already interested in philosophy. But to most people, that might be too callous or too quick, or might take a few things for granted. So what we're going to do is we're going to see what Socrates does. How does Socrates break down this argument on whether or not people desire bad things? And if they appear to desire bad things, is it because they've been tricked, they have a false belief, or because they actually do have their own understanding and knowledge, recognition, and still desire bad things? Because you have to find a way of making sense of that, because they're the devil. There's a picture of the devil. Right, so how does he break it down? That's what we'll look at next time. Important though, because Meno has already said another definition of virtue, which was harming your enemies. What would qualify someone to be an enemy? Someone who is being tricked into thinking that some bad things are good, or just have lacked the education. Well, mainly it's being tricked, being duped in some way. Or is that your enemy? Someone who is just being tricked? Or is that someone you should have compassion for? Should you harm someone who's been tricked? A child who thinks that cats marry dogs, should you harm them? Is that justice? Because they have a false belief about what's true or good? Or is it because they actually know that cats and dogs don't marry each other, but they choose to act as though it does anyway because they're innately bad? Does that make them an enemy because they seek the badness? If so, in order to justify violence, oppression, and all of the things that follow from violence, oppression, exploitation, and so on, fascism, capitalism, you need to justify violence, which means you have to somehow create an argument for this. So, big stakes on the table. And also, the way we talk to ourselves. Are you bad? Do you stink? Or do you always seek the good? You've just, at some time, learnt something that was good that wasn't. You learnt that something that wasn't good was good. In other words, should you harm yourself? Should you talk down to yourself? Should you belittle yourself in any way, at any time? Because you know what's good. You just screwed up. Or are the problems we have the result of thinking some things that are good that aren't? In other words, are we carrying a false belief that we have been convinced of, often from a young age, that's false, that causes our problems, that we should not beat ourselves up about, but learn some sort of friendly, gentle art, perhaps called the dialectic, to address fairly, and never punish ourselves. By the way, that process is called philosophical midwifery. We do that on the channel too. So big stakes for next time. Let's see. And also worth going into detail to explain why it's worth going into detail to explain why we're going into such detail, to understand Socrates and what he's doing and how he's doing it. If this is the thing he said you should be spending your whole time figuring out and doing. So it's worth it. So, big stakes for what we're going to be doing next time. I hope you're excited. I hope you found something in today to be curious and wondering about. And if you have, practice the dialectic and framing your question and wonder in the comments below or on our Discord channel. You'll find the text for free below. You can find the Discord link below. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Join on Twitch if you want. And I hope to see you next time.